Welcome back to Business for Breakfast.
It is 43 minutes after the hour here on Money Radio 1200. I'm Jeffrey O'Brien.
And I'm Francoise Rhodes.
Right now we're going to talk about corruption, and they're starting to get caught. Yes, they've been receiving a lot of worldwide attention lately. GlaxoSmithKline. Last year, 375 employees were dismissed or agreed to leave voluntarily for various types of misconduct. They had a lot of issues in China, where authorities back in 2013 accused them of funneling up to 3 billion yuan. I guess that's $350 million here. The doctors and officials, they're bribing people for, here, use our medicines. And now they're in trouble in Poland. And they're also in the news, you've got HP, who agreed to pay $108 million to settle 2 bribery investigations that reached Mexico, Poland, and Russia. So a lot of this is happening out there with the multinationals and the companies. And here to discuss this with us is Dr. Adriana Sanford. She teaches business law and ethics to over 1,600 MBA and undergraduate students on an annual basis, and she's a clinical associate professor in the management department of W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. Good morning, Dr. Sanford.
Good morning, Jeffrey. Good morning, Francois.
Good morning.
All right, let's talk about corruption and what's been happening here. What are some of the methods that they're using to do this corruption?
Well, it depends if we're talking about the bribery itself or we're talking about what happens after they get the bribe, the methods of money laundering. If we're looking at the bribery itself, it depends on whether you're dealing with a government official or whether this is on the local side, with another private company. There are many different methods that can be used, but sometimes they use an agent or an independent consultant because the company feels that way they are distancing themselves a little bit from the bribery.
So they have like a bribe agent, like their own little bribe specialist.
Right. And they sometimes, unfortunately some companies think that by doing that, they're not subject to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act. Most companies by now realize that that's not the case, but there's still some out there.
And so I guess money laundering is also involved in these bribes as well, right?
Right. What happens is there are different methods of hiding the money because once you get the money in, depending on who you are, all of a sudden people start looking at you and wondering why all of a sudden you're making so much. This is especially true when you're looking at politicians, government officials. If all of a sudden your representative has a lot of money, they're going to have to figure out a way to launder that money and make it come in a legitimate way.
Well, isn't a lot of the opinions of some of the companies and people working there that, well, in these countries, it's known, it's accepted. This is how you get business done, and we're just trying to fit in and do business here. So what makes it wrong to do business the way, as they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do? Why is that wrong?
Well, first of all, it's wrong if you're a U.S. company because you're subject to the laws of the United States and the laws of those foreign countries. So from a legal perspective, it's wrong. From a moral perspective, I would argue that it is wrong because you're diminishing the value of the services. There's no meaningful competition, and so in those countries that are affected by the bribery, it reduces the quality of the services. And this is important when you're building a building, when you're building, let's say, a bridge, and all of a sudden it collapses. You really need to get a fair and level playing field so that companies can compete.
All right, so who is going after the corruption more? Are the people in those countries noticing it and going after the multinationals, or is it government officials in the United States who are overseeing these things and saying, okay, let's go get the bad guys?
Well, it depends on the country. There's some countries, some jurisdictions that are more actively engaged in the detection, the prosecution, and the asset recovery of corruption. And in those countries, they're obviously finding it. But there are other countries that are unwilling to investigate the corruption, and it's usually an informant, maybe a whistleblower in the company that announces this to or notifies the DOJ or maybe the SEC.
What are some of the impacts of this corruption? Like people might say, well, like we said, this is just a matter of how to do business, and you've pointed out how it's morally wrong and it's legally wrong, but what are some of the impacts of when these things happen?
Well, some of the impacts on executives, on senior executives, is that they can be prosecuted in the United States, let's say Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or under the UK Bribery Act. They are prosecuted for this crime of bribery, but then they can also have simultaneous prosecutions, what we call the growing convergence, because all of a sudden it's not only the bribery, but it's tax. When people are bribing, they don't write this in the books. They don't say this was a bribe, but they call it something else. So all of a sudden you're looking at tax evasion and the tax implications as well. So when a senior executive can be hit with both, bribery and tax evasion.
All right, so there's a lot of intricate schemes, and let's say you're a company and you're trying to also just sort of watch out for what your people are doing overseas, because sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Where do you learn about these schemes and how to avoid them?
You actually have the opportunity to read about these schemes in court documents. You also have access to this in asset recovery lawsuits, reports about those, court opinions. Law enforcement always puts out a lot of information when they're doing an investigation. And there are also the NGOs, like Global Integrity, Global Witness, Global Financial Integrity. They go into the issues and they kind of tell you what to look out for.
Well, I appreciate you being with us. We're out of time. Sorry. We will be back with more Business for Breakfast. We have a giveaway for you, some nifty prizes. Also, we'll fill you in on some IRS audit red flags. We'll be back with more Business for Breakfast right after this on Money Radio 1200.